Okay, so miter saw. This is it's called a combination miter saw, or compound, miter saw, because it does a number of things. First of all, it'll make straight cuts, go down. It will pull out and then go down and go back. Okay. It will also, it'll tilt that way. It'll tilt that way, and that's for making beveled cuts. Okay. So, and then if you want to get it right back to center, you just push that pin where it locks right there, and then you can push this lever back down. So now it's not going to move either way. All right. So, and I know I'm on one side of this machine, but let's keep going. And I'm going to have to move in a second. So this is the blade guard. Now the blade guard, it goes up automatically. So there's no reason for you to get your hand in there and move it. It'll go up by itself. Okay. The switch is right here. All right. So this lever right here, down at the bottom, and move this closer. Okay, this lever right here allows you to move it back and forth. Okay, and this has this gauge right here, which is the miter gauge. Okay, so it'll give you the different angles you need to take at. And this goes like every 10 or so, and then it'll lock in place. Okay. Now, if you want to go someplace in the middle, that's what this knob is for, right here. Right here, sorry. Right there. What that does is it locks it down. Like if you wanted to go in the middle of every 10, then you would use that to lock it down. This also locks it down. So if you wanted to lock it down quickly, you could do it that way or bring it back up, and it always goes to 90. Okay? So one of the things that's really important is to check the position of the fence, because the fence tells you if it's a true 90 degree or not. So when you get to this saw, right there, okay, these two bolts, right here and right here, will adjust the fence. And there's four of them. There's two here, and then there's two on the other side that allow you to move the fence one way or the other. So it's always a good idea to check the fence. I'm using this combination square to make sure that my blade is true. What I found is that once you start cutting different angles, especially at a 45 degree angle, if you don't have this at a 290, when you go to 45, it's not going to be true. So let's just look at that right now. The blade goes down with this. So as you can tell, the blade is set. It won't go any farther down than that. Okay, so that's the depth gauge adjustment. This lever has to come over in order to engage that. Otherwise, it's going to go all the way down and make the final cut. Okay, and this is the head pin lock. So what that does is once you go down there, it locks that in place. Okay, and this is the rail lock. As you can tell, it's moving back and forth right now. Okay, once I engage that, now it's not going to move. And the purpose for this head pin lock and the rail lock has two purposes. Okay, one of them is to keep it in place so that it doesn't move when you're going back and forth. It has this handle here and this handle here, so you could pick the whole thing up and move it if you're transporting it from one place to another. Okay, so when you take off the head adjustment pin or the head pin lock, the rail lock moves, and this is for cutting larger pieces of material. So if I have a big piece of material that's sitting on here,
that's what I want to be able to cut here and go down, and I'll show you that in a minute. But if you're not cutting a large piece of material and you just want to make a straight cut, then you would lock the rails down so this doesn't slide, so you're just making a straight cut down. Okay? So the other thing that I wanted to show you is around this other side, so I'm going to move the camera for a minute, so hold on one second. Okay, and that's this right here. This is the quick action clamp, and in this class what I want to make sure that you do is you use the quick action clamp at all times when you're cutting on a miter saw, either on this saw or the other miter saw on the other side of the room. You're going to use this clamp, and the reason for that is if you're going to make a cut, you want to make sure that you're able to use the quick action clamp to clamp your piece of material down. Okay? You don't want to, so once it's clamped down and it doesn't move, now I can make this cut safely, right? Now if I needed to cut a smaller piece, and it was too small to be held by the clamp, it just doesn't reach over there. In other words, my hands are this close. I don't want to cut it on this machine. I want to take this over to the box table saw and cut it there where my hands aren't anywhere close to the blade. Okay, so if you can't cut it with the quick action clamp, I don't want you to cut it on this machine. You need to go over the table saw and cut it there, because your hands are really too close to the saw blade in order for it to be done safely. So you never want to cut a piece of material that's smaller than you can cut, than you can clamp down. Okay, the other thing is that this is the bevel gauge back here. What that does is it allows you to tilt the blade to cut a bevel cut. In other words, the blade's going to be an angle and it's going to cut that way. Okay, so you just got to know where that's at. And that's basically the parts that I needed to show you on this side of the machine that we didn't get earlier.
Never to put your hands closer than that. So we're going to use the quick action clamp. I'm going to go ahead and keep my hand outside the line or close to the line and just cut a small piece. Now the one thing you don't want to do is just grab it, turn it on, and just yank it down, okay? Because that's going to cause problems. So anytime you use this saw, you want to turn it on without it touching the material. And if you remember, that's kind of a common safety procedure. Never start a saw with the material in contact with the blade, because you can have all kinds of issues. So you always want to start the saw up here, pull the trigger, okay, and then go down. You want to go to the bottom of your cut, let go of the trigger before you raise it up. The blade has to have come to a complete stop. You never want to just cut and let it come right back up, okay, because a lot of times it can happen where these pieces will wobble. These pieces will wobble. What's that?
No, I'm telling Eduardo he got a camera on.
You guys can see what I'm doing though, right?
Yeah, we can see what you're doing.
Alright. Okay, so you want to make sure that you go all the way down, come to the bottom of your cut, and then let go of the trigger, wait till the blade stops before you come up. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and cut a 45-degree angle on this, and then we're going to check it to see if it's true. So that's 30, that's 45. So I'm going to cut it right there. Same thing applies. Hold your hand as far away from the blade as possible. For you guys, you're going to use the quick action clamp. And then it's the same process, okay? And right now, this The sliding rails are locked, so it doesn't slide. It's just a chop saw in a sense. It doesn't come out at all. And that's how you want to cut. You don't want to rush it. You want to allow the blade to cut. If you just force it down, it's going to grab it and you're going to have all kinds of problems. So in a sense, what I have here is 245s. So hold on one second. All right. So these two are going to come together. And what you would do with something like that is make a frame. So I want to check it to make sure that it's a 90-degree angle. So I can do it two ways. I'm going to move this camera real quick. Okay, I can use a tri-square, which is this one right here, to check that. And as you can tell, it's just a little off. And that's the problem that I've always had with making these cuts on the miter saw, is that it takes a while to fine tune it so that it's a true 90-degree angle. So here's another way to check it. This combination square has a 45-degree angle on it. That's right here. Okay. Now I can check this by just putting this on there, and it is really close. You can barely see that gap right there. It almost looks like it's true, to tell you the truth. It's just a tiny bit off, and you can see it. I'm going to draw a line, and maybe we'll be able to see it a little bit better. So it looks like this right here and this right here isn't the same measurement, so it's just a tiny bit off. So you would have to make an adjustment to the miter saw in order to get that 245. And where you have problems with you doing this is if you're doing a picture frame or doing something that needs a 290-degree angle, and then you look at this, so that little gap right there, see that little gap right there? That's enough to throw your whole picture frame off when you're putting it together. So it's about fine-tuning it to make sure that you're at a 245. So when you're using this saw, remember, it's all about keeping your hands away from the blade, as far away as you can, okay? You don't want to get your hands anywhere near that blade. Now, I'm going to make another cut so you guys can see it. I'm going to unlock the rails. Grab a wire piece of wood, which is right here. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, and I'm just going to make a random cut so that you guys can see the action. Now, if you're cutting, now this is plywood, so it doesn't have a lot of grain where it's going to come back on itself, so it's not going to pinch. But sometimes when you're cutting a solid piece of wood, you're going to run into issues where you start to cut and then it starts to bind up because the wood is pushing back on itself, and you're going to get kickback. So the best process, if you're using a solid piece of wood, this is plywood, so it's not going to do it, but sometimes you'll have where the grain of the wood pushes back on itself. So you want to start by cutting a little bit of a line at a time. You don't want to cut all the way down because then you run into problems. So you want to start with a little cut, go again, and then you can get that cut. But on plywood, you're not going to get that thing happens. Where it happens mostly is with pine, softwood like a walnut, where the grain of the wood wants to push back after you cut it. And what happens is, like if I was cutting this, the grain of wood wants to push back and pinch on the back end. And that's where you get kickback. So you got to cut a little bit at a time to allow yourself to take off more in the kerf. So if you're cutting a solid piece of wood, not plywood, you want to start with a little cut on top, then go deeper, then go deeper. It might take you 3 strokes to actually cut that material in a safe fashion. Okay? And the other thing is that when you start to cut and you're doing a beveled cut, okay, and you're making this cut, that blade is exposed, right? And it can be pretty dangerous. So you really need to take your time and cut slowly so that you don't run into issues, especially on a bevel cut, because that blade is really exposed and everything can happen. So you need to be careful.